When Helen Mirren speaks, the world doesn't just hear words. It feels the weight of a lifetime behind every syllable. Each pause, each glance seems crafted by a woman who's spent decades searching for truth, both on a stage and within herself. But for years, there was one story she never told, one partnership that haunted her long after the cameras stopped rolling. Her time working alongside the late, great Christopher Plummer. Together, they brought to life one of cinema's most profound portrayals of love and torment, Leo Tolstoy and his wife, Sophia, in The Last Station. Critics called it a masterclass in acting. Audiences called it unforgettable. Yet behind that brilliance, something deeper unfolded. Two giants of their craft, two perfectionists standing on opposite sides of the same mirror. Their performances burned with a kind of rawness that couldn't be rehearsed because, as Helen would one day admit, not all of it was acting. There were moments of tension, admiration, and quiet recognition, the kind of understanding that only exists when two souls truly see each other. Now, after years of silence, Helen Mirren has decided to speak. Not about gossip or glory, but about the man behind the legend, the Christopher Plummer she knew, brilliant, flawed, and achingly human. When filming began on The Last Station in the late 2000s, both Helen Mirren and Christopher Plummer were already legends in their own right. Helen had just come off her Oscar triumph for The Queen, while Plummer was entering the final luminous act of a career that had spanned more than half a century. Yet neither seemed interested in basking in past glory. What drew them to The Last Station wasn't prestige, it was truth. The kind that doesn't live in dialogue, but in the quiet fractures between two people who have loved, fought, and endured. Plummer was cast as Leo Tolstoy, the aging author wrestling with fame, guilt, and the weight of his convictions. Mirren became Sophia, the wife who refused to be erased by history, fiercely intelligent, deeply wounded, and unwilling to let go of love, even as it crumbled in her hands. On paper, it was a story about the final days of a great writer. But to the two actors, it became something else, something painfully real, a meditation on endurance, resentment, and devotion, themes that echo in every long relationship weathered by time. The first table read set the tone. Plummer arrived early, a script in hand, already inhabiting Tolstoy's quiet gravity. Mirren entered moments later, composed, observant, studying every detail, her energy coiled like a spring. When their voices finally collided across the table, the air in the room changed. The crew fell silent. What emerged wasn't performance, it was confrontation. Two masters, two wills, each daring the other to go deeper. Director Michael Hoffman later said it felt like lightning had struck the room. He knew then this wasn't going to be just another film. It would be a clash of truth and ego, a duet of fire and restraint. From that moment, everyone understood. The Last Station would not be acted. It would be lived. It didn't take long for the differences between Helen Mirren and Christopher Plummer to show. Both were products of the theater, but their methods were worlds apart. Helen worked through instinct. She chased emotion, let chaos sculpt her choices. Plummer, on the other hand, relied on a structure, rhythm, precision, and a discipline carved from decades of Shakespeare. He used to say, acting is music, not accident. And in The Last Station, every note mattered. During one early scene, Helen improvised, a trembling hand reaching toward Tolstoy's sleeve. Plummer froze mid-line, eyes sharp as glass. "Don't touch me yet," he muttered, still half inside the world of Tolstoy. The director called cut. The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Helen smiled, not in defiance, but in challenge. "Then make me believe I shouldn't," she said softly. From that moment, the boundaries between them disappeared. Their scenes burned with tension, raw and unpredictable. Crew members would whisper that they never knew where acting ended and reality began. Mornings on set were quiet, two professionals working separately, fine-tuning every movement. But when the cameras rolled in the afternoon, it was war. They argued, interrupted, pushed, and provoked until something real broke through the surface. Hoffman didn't stop them. He knew that discomfort was the heartbeat of truth. Plummer's temper was famous. He'd once admitted to being, in his words, an arrogant young bastard. Though age had mellowed him, sparks still flew when a scene dragged or a line fell flat. Helen met that fire head-on. She didn't yield, she never did. What could have been hostility became alchemy. Each confrontation forged something stronger, mutual respect. He admired her fearlessness. She admired his precision. And beneath it all was a current neither could name, admiration perhaps, or something dangerously close to love. Between takes, tension melted into laughter. Plummer's wit was sharp as ever, a quiet joke, a raised eyebrow, and Helen would laugh, that deep, genuine laugh that filled the cold Russian air. One assistant later recalled catching Plummer watching playback of a scene, whispering under his breath, "She's extraordinary." It wasn't meant for anyone to hear, but Helen did, and that one line, she'd later admit, stayed with her longer than any review ever could. As filming continued, the fire between Helen Mirren and Christopher Plummer began to change. The sharp edges softened, replaced by something quieter. Not surrender, but recognition. They had fought each other, yes, but in doing so, they had learned to see one another. Each morning, they arrived on set with renewed purpose. Helen, with her notes scribbled in the margins, Plummer with his script folded and worn like a prayer book. The friction that once threatened to divide them had become their rhythm. They no longer feared the tension. They trusted it. By the time the camera rolled on their final arguments as Tolstoy and Sophia, the emotion you see on screen wasn't rehearsed. It was real. Two souls giving everything they had, stripping away performance until only truth remained. Director Michael Hoffman later said, "They fought beautifully. What you see in those scenes is not acting, it's confession." When production finally wrapped, there were no grand speeches, no tearful farewells, just two artists standing side by side in quiet understanding. They didn't need to say what had happened between them. It was written in every frame of film. Afterward, Plummer sent Helen a short handwritten note. "Thank you for keeping me honest." She folded it carefully and tucked it between the pages of her script, a small piece of paper that carried the weight of everything left unsaid. Years later, Helen would call The Last Station one of the most demanding experiences of her career, not because of the workload or the emotional depth, but because of what it revealed about truth, art, and human connection. For Christopher Plummer, it brought his first and only Oscar nomination. For Helen Mirren, it brought a new kind of reverence, not from the public, but from herself, because somewhere in that Russian winter, amid exhaustion, laughter, and honesty, two great actors had found a mirror in each other. Helen Mirren has often said that what reveals a person isn't what they show, but what they protect. And during the months of filming The Last Station, she began to see what Christopher Plummer guarded most carefully, himself. Behind the elegance, the grand voice, and the effortless charm was a man quietly wrestling with time. He spoke of Shakespeare as though recalling an old friend, but hesitated whenever age, legacy, or regret entered the conversation. Helen understood those silences all too well. She had lived long enough in an industry obsessed with youth to know that silence is often where truth hides. Plummer would run through his lines again and again, changing a single word, a tiny inflection, and then, as if nothing had happened, deliver perfection once the camera rolled. To Helen, this wasn't vanity, it was armor, a lifetime's habit of survival in a business that rewards confidence more than kindness. Sometimes she would find him sitting alone by the window of the drafty Russian estate set, humming old jazz tunes, fragments of melodies that belonged to another time. She never interrupted. She simply watched, realizing that music was his refuge, a place where he didn't need to perform. Later, she would describe that sound, his voice softened by age but still rich with warmth, as one of her most vivid memories of him. There was dignity in the way he carried himself. Each morning, he arrived immaculate, jacket pressed, shoes polished, his eyes gleaming with quiet discipline. He joked about vanity, but Helen knew better. It wasn't vanity, it was pride, a refusal to let the years dictate who he became. Off camera, their conversations turned surprisingly ordinary. Gardens, literature, the absurdity of fame. Helen once confessed how strange it felt to be recognized not for who she was, but for the people she'd pretended to be. Plummer nodded, smiled faintly, and said, "That's the curse of doing it well." It was the only time he admitted how deeply acting had cost him, how playing so many others had made it harder to find himself. Yet even then, Helen saw in him something the world rarely did, a gentleness that cut through his sharp wit and regal posture. During one long day of shooting, an extra slipped on the icy ground. Before anyone could react, Plummer rushed to her side, helping her up with a joke about Tolstoy's clumsy students. No cameras, no applause, just instinct. Helen never forgot that moment. For her, it revealed everything, the real man behind the legend. When news broke in early 2021 that Christopher Plummer had passed away at the age of 91, Helen Mirren didn't rush to make a statement. For several days, she remained silent. Those who knew her understood why. Grief for Helen was something sacred, something private. She hadn't just lost a colleague, she had lost a man who, in his quiet way, had changed how she saw her craft and herself. When she finally spoke, her words were simple, yet heavy with emotion. She called him a mighty heart and said that working with him was one of the great privileges of her career. But it was what she didn't say, the long pauses between her sentences, that revealed the truth, the ache of remembering details too personal to share. Not long after, while watching a clip from The Last Station for a retrospective, Helen found herself frozen. The camera lingered on Plummer's face as Tolstoy took his final breath. She later said it was like watching time itself disappear. That moment, that performance, had captured something no award or eulogy ever could: his essence, his defiance, his quiet brilliance. Plummer never faded from the world. Even in his later years, he worked relentlessly, performing, recording, reading scripts, living with the same curiosity that first drew him to the stage decades earlier. To Helen, that was his greatest lesson. Art isn't about fame or applause, it's about endurance. After his passing, friends noticed she began keeping one of his photographs in her dressing room. Not a studio portrait, but a candid shot. Plummer between takes, coat half buttoned, smirking at something unseen. She said it reminded her that even legends are just people trying to get the next moment right. When the Academy honored him during its In Memoriam segment that year, Helen sat in quiet reflection as his decades of work flashed across the screen. The Sound of Music, The Insider, Beginners, The Last Station. For most, it was nostalgia. For her, it was something deeper, a reminder of the man who once challenged her, frustrated her, and ultimately inspired her. She later described his death not as an ending, but as the closing of a chapter, because even in absence, his influence persisted. Young actors still quoted him. Directors still spoke of his dedication. And Helen, who had seen the man behind the myth, knew that his true gift wasn't fame. It was the reminder that vulnerability and a strength can coexist in one human being. In the years since, she has spoken of him sparingly, but always with reverence. She calls him the last of the old guard, a phrase she chooses carefully because she knows it's true. In a world that moves too fast, Christopher Plummer remained timeless, a living proof that elegance, wit, and moral courage never go out of style. When asked once if she ever wished she had told him how much he meant to her, Helen smiled softly and said, "I didn't need to. He already knew." And perhaps that's what made their bond so enduring. Two lives intersecting briefly, leaving behind a truth neither needed to explain. Today, when Helen speaks of The Last Station, she doesn't call it just a film. She calls it a moment in time, the rare alignment of two souls at precisely the right point in their lives. For her, it was proof that connection doesn't depend on age, fame, or circumstance. It depends on honesty. And Christopher Plummer, beneath the formality and brilliance, was honest to his core. Their partnership began as tension and ended as understanding. What started as rivalry became friendship. And when the curtain finally fell, what remained wasn't fame or applause, but the echo of two voices, distinct yet in harmony, reminding the world that truth in art, as in life, only survives when it's shared.